Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along. We're here today. We're going to look at, basically give an introduction to the recently published NatSpec paper called Getting Started with BIM. And we're just going to look at some of the key topics which are discussed in that paper. Just in case anyone didn't pick up a copy, they're at the table on the back there, so if you need to pick up a copy. And also the BIM guide is on the table at the back as well. It's worth picking up a copy of that. We'll talk about a little bit about the BIM guide today as well. Also, since we've got quite a smallish group, what we found with the other presentations we've done is when it's a smaller group, it's quite good to get a bit of interaction going and get a little bit of discussion going about maybe your experience and where you're at in terms of BIM. So we'll probably come to that a little bit later on. Okay, so we'll look at the following areas today, and we'll start off a little bit about NatSpec and who we are and why we have an interest in BIM. Also at this point, we'll look briefly at what BIM is and also some of the potential uses of BIM, just to make sure that everyone has that base understanding of the various uses of BIM. And then we'll work through the key areas discussed in the paper, and that's of pre-implementation, of implementation planning and implementation execution. And then we'll finish off with some key points that we feel for a successful transition to BIM. And then we'll have some time at the end for some questions and discussion, but feel free to ask a question at any point during the morning, just to share that. And so the key message that we're really hoping to get across today is that implementing BIM can be a simple process, but if you keep it simple. So it's about that word simple, trying to keep it simple. So, okay, so NatSpec. NatSpec was founded in 1975, and we're a national not-for-profit organisation with the objective of improving quality and productivity of the construction industry. And this is primarily achieved through the publication of the National Master Specification Systems of NatSpec and Ausspec. And they provide a nationally consistent structured construction specification information. We're owned by the major representatives of the construction industry. They're listed here. And not being aligned to any one organisation or any one agenda means that we can provide impartial and unbiased information to the industry. We also have a number of government shareholders, and each state and territory has a department who are shareholders of NatSpec, and that's usually the department who are responsible for construction or building. And what it shows is state and federal government require the use of NatSpec on their projects, which shows that they recognise the value of having a system such as NatSpec in place. We also liaise directly with many industry organisations, again just some of them listed here, but really that's so we can draw on their specialist expertise and they review our information, make sure that our information is kept up to date and that we're reflecting current industry practice. And in a similar way, we have a number of what we call our product partners. And we produce specification work section templates in conjunction with them, which includes their products and the requirements for the installation of their products. So again, this keeps us in touch with the industry and making sure that our information is current. We're also involved in a number of international organisations. ICIS there in the top left is the Construction Information Society, and they're a group of organisations who produce master specifications globally. And so we share information with these organisations and keeping abreast of what the developments that are happening in their countries. We're also involved in a number of ISO standard committees. Neil, who's giving the presentation this afternoon, is the chair on one of those ISO mirror committees for BIM standards. And we're also involved in a number of Australian standard committees as well. And Building Smart there as well. We're also involved in a number of Building Smart initiatives and working groups with Building Smart. So moving on to BIM, and to answer the question, so what is BIM? So put simply, BIM involves creating a digital model of a building, but that model also manages the data about it through all stages of that building's life, from design and through construction and ongoing maintenance. But I suppose what BIM is really about is that sharing of structured information. And it's that information and data aspect that makes BIM much more than just 3D visualization. So you may ask, why does NatSpec have an interest in BIM? Well, we have an interest in that structured information aspect of BIM, but in essence we believe that BIM can provide improved methods of design and construction and communication in the industry, and in turn that leads to improved quality and productivity, which is our objective, and that's why we have an interest in BIM. So NatSpec has produced a number of BIM-related documents, the most significant of which being the NatSpec National BIM Guide, and this was released in 2011, and again a copy is at the back, so everyone can grab a copy of that before they leave. We were approached by government and industry at that time to produce a document that allowed people to clarify their requirements for BIM on a project. As there appeared to be a lot of uncertainty about exactly what people meant when they said that they could do BIM, or even what people meant when they said that they wanted BIM on their project. So the BIM guide was produced to help resolve some of these issues at that project-specific level. So the BIM guide's available freely, as with all our BIM documents, are available for free download on our website, and I'll give you the address of our website a bit later on. And since the BIM guide's release, it's received recognition both nationally and internationally, and it's used quite extensively now in Australia, and not just by NatSpec subscribers. So as I said, the purpose for these NatSpec BIM documents is really to assist clients and consultants and stakeholders to clarify their requirements in a nationally consistent manner. And again, it's all about that improved quality and productivity, and that's our objective. So we'll just have a quick look at the BIM guide, but in particular the various uses of BIM that are defined within that guide. This is really just to give some background to the topic and to make sure that everyone's on the same page and has that base understanding of the various uses of BIM before we delve into the implementation itself. The Getting Started paper doesn't cover BIM uses. It assumes that the potential uses and the benefits of BIM are already understood before you get to the stage of getting started. So that's why we thought we'd just quickly run through it this morning. So the BIM guide defines these 7 primary uses of BIM, all within section 7 of the BIM guide. And so the numbering that you see here on this slide and also on the following slides relate to the clause numbers in the BIM guide, not in the Getting Started paper. So we'll just have a quick look at each of those 7 primary uses. So each of the 7 uses that are described are then broken down into further detailed uses, and there's a total of 23 uses detailed within the guide. And so we won't go into the specifics of each of those uses, but if you need further information on that, it's all detailed within the guide, within that section 7. So for the first primary use, that's split down into these 3 detailed uses of modelling the existing conditions, your site analysis, and your space and equipment validation. And for the second primary use, which is architectural modelling, again broken down into 4 uses here. So you've got your spatial models, using it for design visualization, for code checking, and for sustainability evaluation. And I suppose it's important to note, although BIM is a fairly new term in the industry, a lot of the uses of BIM are not new concepts. Like using models for design visualization is not new. So many of the uses of BIM are not new concepts for the industry. So the next use, structural modelling and analysis. This isn't broken down into further uses, it's just that one primary use. But again, this is not a new thing. Digital models have been used for structural analysis for a long time. So I suppose where the difference really and where BIM comes in is about sharing those models and collaboratively sharing that information. So the next primary use then we have is MEP modelling and analysis. And that analysis part is broken down then into 4 further detailed uses of energy analysis, virtual testing and balancing, lighting analysis, and using the model for fire engineering purposes. Fifth one, quantity takeoff and cost planning. Again, no further detailed uses for that one, but it's basically using the model for your quantities and working out your costs, taking that information directly from the model. So the sixth primary use there we have is construction models, and this is really where BIM's really taking hold in the industry at the moment. Contractors are really starting to reap the benefits of using BIM, and so that primary use is broken down into these 7 detailed uses here, which is clash detection, construction systems design, digital fabrication, planning construction, and then the communication of that planning, site utilization planning, and lift planning. And by lift planning, we're talking about craneage and lifting things on site, not the actual lifts in the building. So all of these uses save time on site, and that's where big savings can be made for the contractor. But obviously, it also assists consultants because it means that there's less RFIs coming from site and less issues to deal with when the project actually gets to site. So even though contractors are seeing some big benefits, it should also lead through to consultants not taking up as much of their time during the construction phase. And then the final primary use, which we have detailed in the guide, is for facilities management. And then that's broken down into these 3 detailed uses, where we have the COBie and commissioning, and then the handover information and security assessment or disaster planning. So this is really the area where BIM can have a big impact in the future, but it's not really being used for this purpose in any significant number of projects at the moment. There are some projects which are going down this route, but I think it needs a lot of involvement early up from the people who are going to run the building and finding out the information they need to get in there early on to make it useful. So as I said, all of these uses are detailed further in the guide, but just wanted to run through them quickly so that everyone's got that understanding. And that understanding is what's required before you really should make that decision that you're going to implement BIM. So moving on to why we're here this morning, that's to discuss the recent publication of the NatSpec BIM paper, Getting Started with BIM. And so some of the queries we're receiving from our subscribers in responses to some surveys we carried out was that there was some uncertainty out there about exactly how to get going and how to get started with BIM, and that there was a need for some real entry-level guidance just to get people going. So that's why we decided to produce this paper. And it sets out a simple process here just to get you going, to get your foot on the ladder. So the paper's based on the collective experience of a number of organisations who've successfully implemented BIM, and also some further research which we did in-house. And the aim of the paper really is, again, just to show that transitioning to BIM can be simple if you keep the process simple. Okay, well that's good. We'll move on. Everyone has an idea where everyone's at now. We might come back as we're going on, just when we talk about some of the decisions that need to be made, and maybe just questions to some of you that have already kind of jumped on with BIM and you're doing some BIM, about how you came to those decisions, or what was the driver of why you came to those decisions. Okay, so the paper itself sets out this simple process to follow when implementing BIM. And as I said, it's aimed at consultants, but the issues are just as important for clients or contractors, and it's really aimed at that entry-level guidance to help you get going, and it doesn't concentrate on some of the more complex issues of BIM, about collaboration and integration of models. So it doesn't look at those sort of issues. It's trying to keep it very simple. So the paper assumes that the decision to implement BIM has already been made, and the business case for implementing BIM within your organisation has been made. So it aims to answer that question, so where do we go from here and what do we do now? So it details some issues that need to be considered and provides you with some guidance on how you can approach those considerations, which then of course you can adapt to suit the requirements of your organisation. But following a process such as the one described in the paper, and as we'll sort of work through this morning, really ensures your best chance of a successful transition to BIM. So I said the paper doesn't focus on those project-specific or technical issues of using BIM software, and we won't get into that this morning either. But there is further information on that on our website as well, from our BIM website. So there's a lot of information there which is available to freely download. So the paper introduces this implementation flowchart, which goes through the process of implementation. And so we'll see a lot of this slide today, because we'll keep coming back to it as we work our way through the discussion, really using it as a roadmap to show where we are in terms of the discussion and also in terms of the implementation process. So to start off, we'll look briefly at what we've called pre-implementation. And this is really the stage before you start your implementation process. And in the discussions there, it sounds like a lot of you are kind of past this stage, really. Most of you are kind of on with using BIM already, but hopefully we'll still get some information out of it. So the paper starts at the point where the decision to implement BIM has already been made and the business case has been agreed. So that's a key part of the process. So your strategic business goals that really should be driving your implementation process and what it is you're actually trying to achieve by implementing BIM. We'll discuss this a bit further when we're looking at goals during the planning stage. And implementing BIM really needs to be considered in the same way as any other business investment. It's likely you can experience a loss of productivity in the beginning, but this should lead to gains further down the line. So we've already covered the potential uses of BIM, and as I said, the paper is written, it seems that that's already been covered and understood. But there is some information in Appendix C of the paper about potential BIM uses, then obviously also in the BIM guide, and on our website there's some further information there as well. Yeah, that's what we're hearing. So these are just some, as we were putting the paper together, some of the reasons we were hearing about why people were making that decision. So obviously, having improved efficiency is one, and that improved integration and coordination, knowing that if you change something in one place, it gets updated everywhere, your drawings are coordinated, hopefully meaning less problems on site. And that bottom point there, the better marketing potential, that's the one we're really hearing. That's so people can use, say that they're doing BIM and win projects that have been BIM related. Okay, so once the decision has been made, then it's time to prepare and get ready for the change that's going to happen. So, as I touched on, it's really important to get everyone on board. So if there's a member of the team who's not enthusiastic about implementing BIM, then the chances of success are greatly reduced. And you'll find not all staff will agree. There'll be people who believe that your current methods are fine and completely efficient. So really you need to overcome those fears early on and get them on board, because having them raise their head later on when things are getting a little bit tough can just cause disruption and possibly even derail your implementation process. It's always easier to go back to old methods when it gets tough, and so you don't want to abandon the implementation. It's very hard to get back on once you've given up once. So it's important to engage all levels of staff, from management right down to your non-technical support staff. Everyone really needs to know the reasons why you're implementing BIM and what changes are going to occur within your business. And they must understand that bigger picture for the business and why you're implementing BIM. And so as I said, it's support from the principals is essential, and they really must believe that BIM is the right way to go for the organisation. And as I said, all staff must be ready for that change, because there's going to be new ways of working, new skills required. BIM is a much more collaborative way of working than they would have been used to in the past. So a key step in your preparation is to select a change agent, or we've called it change agent, but it could be a BIM leader or a BIM manager. But really this is just the person who's going to be responsible for your BIM implementation. So they must be a person who has some authority, so they don't have to be upper level management, but just someone with a bit of authority that people will listen to. And so a CAD manager or one of your existing CAD managers may seem like the obvious choice, but really it's important that they're not just a software guru. They must understand project delivery and the business aspects of your implementation, and really understand why you're implementing BIM. And as I said, because there will be change, they must be open-minded, so they must be ready for change. Some of the people you're discussing that don't fit that category, then they're obviously not the right people for the job. So this person will be responsible for assessing your current situation, identifying your requirements for BIM, actioning your implementation plan, and generally leading your organization through the transition to BIM. So, as it says down the bottom there, this can be a difficult choice if there's no one in your organization with any experience of BIM. So just look at some of the options you've got there for selecting this change agent. So the first one there is obviously to train up an existing staff member if you don't have the experience. But this could be difficult and certainly will be time consuming. So potentially the two options below are the way to go. So you look at hiring someone that has that experience, and that could be possibly just on a fixed term contract or even part-time. Or you could look at hiring a consultant, and they would then come in and just help you in that initial period. So they'd work with someone that you nominate within your organisation who would then become your BIM leader. So they'd really just be there for that initial period. So they'd help, obviously, identify your requirements and develop your plan, and then they'd hand over to the person you've nominated, and that person will be responsible for executing your implementation plan and keeping you going on that process. So we're at the point now where your organisation's all ready to go and they're enthusiastic about implementing BIM. So we'll move on to that planning stage of your implementation and some of the things that you must consider. So for the next series of slides, we're really going to be looking at that top half of the flowchart, which covers the planning aspect. So it's essential to set out a plan for the implementation of BIM. And this plan will really be a compilation of the following tasks which we're going to discuss. And it also needs to identify clear goals and your objectives, and also set criteria for measuring their success. We'll also detail your approach to training, how changes to workflows and changes to responsibilities will be managed. And so the plan will look at two primary aspects, which is the planning and execution. So the first step in the process is to analyse the current situation. This is an exercise really that can be completed before you select your change agent. It's just a review of your current practices, but it will be an especially important exercise if you do go down that consultant route, so that they've got a good understanding of where you're currently at. So the feedback we received, again, when we were putting this paper together, is that this is a really important stage, but it's often overlooked or bypassed completely. It can be very difficult to identify what your requirements actually are, or more importantly, to measure your success later down the line if you haven't done this exercise. But it's also important not to turn this into a mammoth exercise that takes months. It really should just be a quick analysis to provide you with a baseline and a benchmark for the future. So just looking at some of the items there about how you organise your information, what your typical timescales are, what services you currently provide, and as I said, then this provides that context for the future. So that analysis can be undertaken looking at these three overlapping perspectives of people, process, and technology. So looking at people, so you carry out an analysis of your current personnel capabilities considering these points here. When we're talking about roles, really we're saying just understanding what roles exist. So do you currently have just pure drafting technicians? Do your designers carry out drafting as well? And can the staff be upskilled? So if you do have pure drafters in the BIM world, can they take on more design responsibility? Looking at who's going to require the training and what level of training, which we'll discuss a bit later on. And then also just looking at how your teams may need to be reorganised or adjusted to suit the requirements of BIM projects. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So looking at your process, and again, in a similar way, you'd analyse your current procedures and work methods, considering these points here. When we're talking about a typical project, that's really maybe difficult, but it's looking at what sort of type of project do you typically do. Is it generally health work or commercial? Then sort of what duration it takes to complete a project and what sort of typical value of a project. And then also identifying any difficulties you may have or you may experience on projects at the moment. and also looking at how your data management, so looking at your filing systems, possibly what classification system you use. And again, in terms of documentation, just looking at what documentation processes are involved in a typical project and how long they take. So how long it takes to do checking, how long it takes to produce construction documentation. Also looking at, if you use CAD libraries, how they're used and to what extent you use them, and how you store them on your filing systems. And then finally looking at your IT capability or your technology. And it's really just finding out about what your current hardware, what the technical specifications are, and looking at your costs involved in your current technology, so licensing costs and update costs, and obviously any costs you currently have for training and education. And then the last point there as well, remote working. So if you share work between offices, you really need to get an understanding of how that's facilitated and what's required to allow that to happen in your current situation. Okay, so having that thorough understanding of your current situation allows you to measure your success in the future, but it also gives you that context for defining the later stages of your implementation, and in particular these next two steps, which is identifying your requirements and your goals. So identifying your requirements, your change agent or your BIM leader will do this job, and it should be an easy job for someone with a good understanding of BIM and also a good understanding of your current situation. So your requirements could include your training, what budget costs and resources you need to allocate, what technology upgrades you've got, and then what new roles might be required. Or it may be the case that you need that greater support, might be identified that you need that greater support from upper management. So we'll talk about these issues as we progress through the rest of the seminar. But it's important that those requirements are directly related to your goals and your objectives for implementing them. So it's essential to document your goals and your objectives, and also to set criteria to determine if they've been achieved. So basically, these are the real reasons why you're implementing BIM and what it is you're trying to achieve as a business. So these are your business goals, really, and your implementation goals. So some typical goals may be here to increase productivity, or increase your fees, or maybe work with new clients. Some feedback, again, when we're putting it together, is that BIM users are finding their early BIM projects that their overall time for documentation wasn't really decreasing, but what they were finding is that their designs were much better coordinated, much more complete, so with a lot less errors. So they were saving time a bit later on, but not in that documentation phase. Okay. So again, it's essential that they're measurable assessment criteria, and this allows you to ultimately assess how well you've been with your implementation later on when we talk about reviewing the process. So you can just shown there, you can consider tabulating those goals, and that table then just becomes part of your BIM implementation plan. And so the final part of the planning stage, and that's to identify the actions and to create a detailed program for the implementation execution. Okay, so once your goals have been defined, you need to set them against a realistic timeline and allocate the appropriate resources, and that's both in terms of financial resources, but also in time and also people. Give yourself some flexibility. So at the same time, you need to identify how procedural issues such as changes to workflows and responsibilities will be managed, and also set some milestones for along the way so you can monitor how you're going on. And if you realise as you're progressing that things just aren't working, then don't be afraid to make changes then and there. Like, there's no point progressing down a route that's just not working. So when identifying your actions, there's some key decisions that will need to be made, and some of them are listed here. So they could be which uses of BIM you're going to employ in your first project, obviously which software you're going to use, who's going to be in that first BIM team, and again we'll discuss all of these in the following sections when we're talking about executing your implementation plan. So moving on to the bottom half of the flowchart now, which is about execution and some of the things that really need to consider when making those key decisions we just talked about. So the approach we're going to discuss, as I said, needs to be adapted to the requirements of your organisation, and in particular the size of your organisation may determine how you approach some of the topics we're going to discuss. For example, large organisations may have the luxury of transitioning to BIM team by team, whereas smaller organisations may have no choice but just to commit all their resources to implementing BIM. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're at a disadvantage, because smaller organisations are often more agile and less bureaucratic and less resistant to change. So sometimes it means they can change quicker and start reaping the benefits. So just that analogy of the speedboat and the line is often used. So this diagram aims to illustrate how the key implementation decisions and considerations are related to each other. So it's a common misconception, but software and hardware considerations alone shouldn't drive your BIM implementation. It really should be your business goals that are driving your implementation. So this diagram is really just saying that the items and the considerations further up should really be determining those lower down, and vice versa, the ones lower down should be supporting those above. So for an example, it should really be your business goals or your implementation goals that are determining which software you choose to use, and then that's how well that software supports your business goals is the key thing. So this diagram is included in the paper as well. So coming back to our flowchart, we'll look at how the team selection for your implementation. And as I said, in a small organisation, this could be everyone. So the selection of the right team can be a key factor to a successful transition to BIM. And this team will be responsible for your first BIM project. And they'll also be the first people to receive training, and then in future they'll provide support to other members of your organisation and being split up and put into different BIM teams. So therefore they really need to be communicative people and happy to share their experiences. So it's no good having someone who's not very talkative or doesn't want to share their experience. And there'll also be quite a bit of extra effort required by this team, possibly out of hours training, and just putting in some extra hours. So it may be worth considering providing incentives for that extra effort, whether it's financial or even just in terms of job security. So looking at the composition of that team, it really should be made up from representatives from across your organisation, so from managers to technicians, really with complementary skills. And again, a simple skill set of just software gurus isn't appropriate. They should closely represent the typical project team that you have in your organisation at the moment. And having that mix of management and technical staff will ensure that all aspects of the implementation are considered. And it also provides a continuity of skills and knowledge over time. Also, as we talked, this can allay fears for any senior personnel that they may get pushed out of the design process by the new design technology and new methods that are being used. And then after training, again, this team can be split up, and each member will be put on different BIM teams throughout your organisation, so sharing their knowledge and their experience. So some of the criteria for that team selection, which is obviously quite similar to the requirements you had for selecting your BIM leader. And so they must be enthusiastic about it, they must be communicative, open-minded to change, obviously willing to learn, and then matching that entry-level enthusiastic technical staff with the experienced management provides that broad foundation of skills and knowledge on which to build. So a key message we received during the compilation of this paper was that BIM was is a much more collaborative way of working than the teams have been used to before. And so it's important to consider the working arrangements of this team that you've put together. So having the team dispersed around the office will often make things difficult for them. And so creating a working environment that, for that team that allows them for this increased collaboration and communication is essential. So placing them close to each other makes it easy for them to share their experiences and bounce on queries they have off each other. So again, back to our flowchart, and moving on to what many consider to be the key element of your BIM implementation. But hopefully what we're saying today that is it's really just a small part, or it should just be a small part of your implementation process, and that's your software and your hardware. So there's various software packages available, and they all provide slightly different functionality, and I'm not going to go into the detail of the various packages and the differences between them. It's probably worth talking to some of the vendors about that, or even with your industry colleagues. But it's important that that selection of software is based on how well that software supports your business goals. So discussing your requirements with other organisations that have already implemented BIM will give you an insight into the right package to choose. Your initial cost and the ongoing cost in licensing and training of BIM software tend to be greater than that than your traditional CAD packages. But those current costs that you have for those CAD packages will eventually be able to be offset against your new BIM costs. But you will have that period of overlap where you'll be concurrently working in BIM and your 2D packages until you really become proficient and you can start doing all your projects in BIM. So some of the things to consider when you're selecting which software package to invest in, and that's really the extent of training and support that's available out there. Also the availability of experienced users in the marketplace is a big one. It's no good getting a software package and then finding that there's no one that can use it. The availability of product libraries and tools for use with the package, and the ability for that software package to link with other software packages and how it can export information for use in other packages. Your initial and ongoing costs of that package, which software packages your regular consultants and clients use is also important for those integration issues. Also, can the software be used with your current hardware, so which might mean you don't have to upgrade your hardware. Okay, moving on to hardware. So CAD drafting packages, or your traditional 2D CAD drafting packages, can generally be operated on your entry-level PCs or laptops, whereas the BIM packages generally have higher demands on hardware capability. So to accommodate these requirements, it's likely that your hardware is going to require some upgrading. So the capability of the workstations you use will really determine the size of the model that you can work on. So having your workstations close to the recommended specs of the software is worth having it. It's worth having your workstations close to that. But then you could have one workstation possibly in the office which is dealing with your higher end processes like rendering or your fly-through, your more marketing things that are high use, high process use. And then also BIM file sizes are generally much larger than what you may have been used to with your CAD files. So you need to consider your data storage capacities and your backup capacities. And then looking at networks, so with your networks, it may be feasible just to upgrade your network when performance issues start to arise. So it's really pays to be proactive for your workstations, get them up to the specifications required, but it may be possible to be reactive for your network. But again, if you've got that remote working arrangements going on, you really need to make sure that, that this is still going to operate with your new BIM software and make sure your network's able to handle that. So again, back to our flowchart. So just looking at our office standards and procedures, and by this we mean possibly any standard details you use, your drawing templates, styles, your filing procedures and the like. So translating your Office standards into a BIM format may take a little bit of time, but really it's essential to get them correct before you start on your first BIM project. If your standards are not translated to the quality and the style of the drawing output that people are used to, then the drawing output from the model is unlikely to be satisfactory, both internally and, more importantly, to your external project team members. So much of the success of your implementation can depend on having good Office standards in place and libraries in place before your first project. So something as simple as a principal getting a drawing and not being happy with the way it looks, or not having the same clarity as what you used to produce, can completely derail your implementation, and again means it gets abandoned and it's very hard to get back on and convince those people that it's the right way to go. So you can take this as an opportunity to update your standards if required, or possibly even delete some typical details that are no longer required. Obviously reuse what's suitable, and items such as line weights can usually be transitioned quite easily to BIM, as well as legends and symbols and logos, etc. But some changes to your existing standards are inevitable, so don't try too hard to replicate your existing standards if you're just finding it too difficult. You could also think about utilising some of the new features of your software, so with your standard drawing layouts, possibly including isometric details or shading diagrams, or 3D cutouts, so really just trying to utilise some of those new bits of your software. So the project team that you've selected could do this for you as part of their training. They just need some initial training in software, but it's probably better, or definitely quicker, to employ someone to do this for you. Someone with a detailed understanding of BIM could do this very quickly, but that also then means that your team can do all their training and all their pre-live project work using your new BIM standards and templates. So it just gets them using your new Office standards right from the start. So it's also a worthwhile exercise to create an Office BIM manual to document these procedures and what you need to do and what needs to be followed when undertaking a BIM project. So this could either be done as an intranet wiki if you work that way, or as a digital copy or even a hard copy. And then during this initial period, during the training, it's really just a live document, so it'll be updated and amended as the processes become apparent. And then you'll review and finalise this document as part of the audit and review process before you roll it out to your whole organisation. So this then can be used as a basis for your future training of other BIM project teams, but also any new personnel that may join the organisation. So it's a good idea to keep it quite short and keep it easy to use. That's key. You don't want a huge document that people just aren't going to use. So looking at your Office procedures, and these really relate to your work methods and your practices, possibly your filing procedures. So BIM's a new way of working, and it requires a much more collaborative approach. So your current procedure is likely to require some adaptation. For example, it's usual that on a BIM project the information is exchanged between project team members at a much earlier stage than you may be used to. So that takes up greater resources and uses up more of the project fees at that earlier stage than may have traditionally been the case. So your typical project resources and allocation and the fee billing structure is likely to require some revision. So just looking at that, your fee resources, unfortunately the diagram's a little bit blurred, but it should be legible hopefully. But the diagram indicates how BIM workflows tend to require more effort and input up front compared to the traditional documentation workflows. So the BIM workflows are indicated here by the green curve, and your traditional workflows by the black curve. So it also indicates that the effort for a BIM project is really put in at the time when the cost of making those design changes are less, and that's indicated by the red line. And it also indicates that the greater effort is required on a BIM project at the time when that ability to impact cost and performance is greater, and that's indicated there by the blue line. So it's just, yeah, it really just kind of graphically shows how you may need to adjust your fees and your resources to load up the earlier phases of the project. So with your procedures, the following issues here will need to be considered. You're thinking about how you store and coordinate your information, whether you'll think about using online document repositories such as Aconex if you don't already, and how you're going to adapt your checking or review procedures for drawings. Also thinking about what classification system you might use, and obviously we have the national classification system which you can download from our website. But so the majority of these issues really only need to be determined by the time you get to the stage where you're going to implement BIM on that first project. But understanding how you're going to approach them could be beneficial earlier on, and obviously making decisions on how you're going to approach these issues also means that your team can include them as part of their training process. Okay, moving on to what's probably the most important part of the implementation, and that's training, or important for having a successful implementation anyway. You must allow adequate funding and time for training. So all levels of staff should receive some form of BIM training so that they're fully aware of the changes that are going to take place within the organisation. And as I said, smaller organisations may have no choice but to provide the same training to everyone, but the larger organisations could think about splitting up the training as we've got listed here. So your senior management or those non-users of the software, really, they could get a presentation demonstrating the capabilities or advantages of using BIM and explaining why BIM is an essential business decision for them. And then your project leaders or the occasional users, really they get training on what the new software is capable of and how to navigate the model, maybe how to create views, plot drawings, check dimensions, adding notes, just sort of the basic uses of the software. And then obviously your technical staff or the everyday users, they're the ones that get the in-depth training on how to use the software and creating working BIM models. So initially in a large organisation, that training should just focus on the senior management, and so they get that understanding and they're on board. And then also just that selected project BIM team really should take place after you've completed that first BIM project and you've carried out that audit and review process and worked out where things can be tweaked and changed, and that's when you roll out your training to the rest of the organisation. So the format of that training really comes down to what suits your organisation best. However, some form of formal structured training is likely to provide the better results in a shorter time period than staff simply trying to teach themselves how to use the software, which may have been the case with 2D software, 2D CAD packages, but it's really good to get that formal training and get a good understanding of the software. Once they have that base understanding, they can improve their knowledge by self-study and teaching themselves a bit more about how to use the software. So feedback again when we were putting this paper together, it was found that some users preferred those full-day or multi-day intensive training courses, and some were really saying that's not the way to go, it's better to do 3 or 4 hours a week and then you can implement it on projects and keep expanding and learn what you've, or expand on what you've learned in the courses. So it really just comes down to what suits your organisation best and what fits in. So the few hours a week option might work well if you've got other commitments going on, you don't have much time to put towards training. So it's essential once that training has occurred that team continue to work in a BIM environment for a month or so at least. So it doesn't have to be full-time, and probably shouldn't be full-time, but you certainly don't want them to just drop it and go back to 2D CAD or go back to their normal documentation procedures. They'll lose that knowledge, and a lot of the skills that they learnt during the training will be lost and possibly forgotten. So they need to be you need to implement those skills so that they take hold and they're remembered. It's also worth considering trying to get your staff to partner with you in their development. Try and show them the benefits of them upskilling, and because attending user groups outside of hours, and try and really show the benefit to their development. Not just financially, but just in other methods. So some of the key decisions in terms of training we've listed here. So whether you provide that in-house training or whether it be external. Again, feedback we were getting saying a lot of people find that in-house training is pretty good because they can get training on projects they're working on and implement the training directly on live projects. So there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions. It's really down to what's suitable for your organisation. So it can be argued that training on a previously completed project or even just part of a completed project allows you to compare old methods with new. There's only one learning curve, and that's of using the software. But then also, there's a lot of non-billable hours there. So working on a live project means less non-billable hours and provides that benefit of applying what's being learned immediately. And then another option you have there at the bottom is maybe the team could carry out training to produce an object library, BIM object library, which you will then use on your future BIM project. So similar to any sort of CAD libraries you may already have. Back to our flow chart again. And so now you're at that point where you're all ready to go and your team are all trained up and you're ready to get going on your first BIM project. So it's really important at this stage not to oversell your BIM capabilities, particularly to external parties, until you're really proficient in using BIM and producing BIM deliverables. So this could even include non-informing members of the same team that you're using BIM software to create the documentation for that project. Because making bold statements about the benefits of BIM or your BIM capabilities could lead to demands being made for efficiencies or services which you're just not able to provide at that point. Or worse still, may even lead to the client looking for a reduction in fees due to the apparent efficiencies you should be experiencing. So it's also important not to scrutinise the team too closely during that period. It will be a tough learning curve on that first project and things will get frustrating for them. So it's better to leave that scrutiny and that review until the end and until the next process we'll talk about, which is the audit and review, and until that first project is complete. It's also important not to spread your resources too thin in that period. It's always easier to, again, as I said, jump back to the old methods, which in that initial period will be quicker for you. So if your resources are thin, it's far too easy to jump back into someone saying, oh, I can do this in 2D CAD quicker, I'll just do it quickly. And then again, once you start doing that, it's hard to get back onto it. So it pays to be patient. Okay, so on that first project, you need to consider what uses of BIM you're going to have on that first project. So it's really important to start slowly, and as the image suggests, to take baby steps, not to try and do everything at once. So aim for what's called little BIM, which really is just 3D modeling, really. So keeping it simple at first increases your likelihood of success. So it's important to concentrate on the task at hand for that first project, which really should be just to produce a coordinated set of construction documentation using your new BIM software. So, and then as your skills improve, you can move on to more of the bigger BIM issues and activities such as performance analysis or inserting data entry for facilities management. But it's really important not to get distracted by those sort of advanced features of your new software. We just end up wasting precious billable hours. So it's important to keep it simple in that first one. As I said, maybe not even telling people that you're using BIM, just trying to produce your coordinated documentation using your new software. So this is actually from Appendix C in the paper, and it's talking about which uses of BIM you can select, but it's worth choosing, as I said, uses of BIM that are going to give you the most return on effort. So ones such as we've got listed here in the green, it should be clear there, is what we've highlighted as a sort of easier or the low-hanging fruit in terms of BIM. So, for example, the design visualization, using the model for design visualization is a simple task if you have the model there. So it doesn't take much effort or input to then use that model for design visualization. So that's an easy BIM use to get going with. And then, as you see in the paper, some of the other uses, they get more complex. But so starting off with those, the ones that are highlighted in green are really the ones to look for first. So looking at what project you'll select for that first BIM project. And again, it's best to start off with a small project, preferably even one with no BIM deliverables, so just getting your head around how to use the software. And using a project that's typical for your organization. So you only have that one learning curve, and that's of using the software. So you're not trying to understand new aspects of the project, just you're just trying to understand how to use your new software. It's important to allow or select a project that has a bit of time in the program, so to accommodate that learning process. It's not a good idea to use a project that has a very quick or short timeline. It just doesn't give you that flexibility up front. You also then possibly consider using BIM for any parts of the project, concentrating on just specific aspects. So you might use your BIM software to create your plans and your elevations and possibly your sections, but then initially you could maybe just use your typical 2D CAD details or your CAD software for your details, that 1 to 20 sort of detail. But obviously that's only initial to get you going on your first project. Ideally you want to be generating all your information in the BIM software. Or it could be a case that you win a project that has BIM deliverables and that's it. So that's your first project. You get no choice in the matter. Okay, so looking at our flowchart again, look at the audit and review process now. And although this is the last stage in the implementation process, it's really the first stage in your next BIM project. And so that's why we put it up there in the top half of the flowchart, under the planning section. And it's something that you should continue to do. After each BIM project, carry out that review and that audit, see where things can change, where you can make improvements, and then implement those on your next project. So the best time to carry out this evaluation is when the construction documentation for your first project is complete. And then you can make those adjustments and implement them on your next project. But again, review and adjust your processes at any time if you're really finding that things just aren't working. And so again, having used a typical project for your organization allows for that easier comparison between your BIM methods and your traditional documentation methods. And so really you need to carry out this review in terms of the assessment criteria that you defined earlier on in the planning stage, considering these items really, like, have your goals been achieved, where were the gains and losses? I suppose the key one is the team satisfied? Does the team still believe that BIM's the way to go? So when that review is complete, that's the time when you update that BIM, update and finalise your BIM manual. So also it's maybe worth considering at that stage having your BIM manual reviewed by someone external. They may be able to provide some further guidance, which you may have overlooked. So. And then it's also at that stage, that's when you develop your longer term strategy for phasing BIM into other projects and how you're going to approach your training of the other staff members. Okay, to help everyone get going on that, we've produced these couple of checklists. There's one in Appendix A, and so the implementation checklist, which you can really just go through and use it as a guide to help you get through that implementation process. So it just sets out the various topics that we talked about and some of the considerations that need to be thought about, and then just gives you somewhere to record any decisions you make on that. And really that can just be taken and form the basis of your implementation plan. And again, we've got a similar one there in Appendix B, and this is just your analysis checklist. So when you're carrying out that analysis of your current situation, it's really just some of the things you need to think about, and again, just somewhere to record those decisions. So again, it's really, we produce these really just to help you get going and get people started on the implementation process and helping you get that plan together. Okay, so some of what we see as the keys to a successful transition to BIM. Top one there is to get everyone on board. It's really a positive perspective is what's required. And also seeking external assistance, particularly for that initial period if you don't have those skills internally. And fully understanding your current situation, that's a key one because that helps you identify your goals and identifying exactly what you're hoping to achieve. Also, providing adequate funding and resources is a key one, particularly in terms of training. And then trying to keep it simple, or keep it simple at first. Don't try and utilise the full capability of your new software, and particularly not on your first project. Progress to those advanced capabilities as you become more proficient in using BIM. And then importantly, always at the end, carry out that audit and review process and see where revisions can be made. Okay, just some final comments then. It's just to always remember BIM is that business investment and needs to be considered that way. There will be that initial drop in productivity, but should lead to gains in the future. And so ultimately your organisation's documentation practices should become more productive, and you should be able to offer new services using the full capability of your new software. And so it's really that key message we're trying to get across, that it can be a simple process if you keep it simple and don't try and dive in the deep end.